Welcome, everyone, to another Business Ready for Sale podcast. It's my great pleasure today to have a friend on board who is known as the family business guy. And we're going to be chatting about family businesses, families in business. I first met John many years ago when he published a book called What Happens If You Get Hit by a Bus, because that's a very interesting topic in its own right. And I featured that book of John's in a recent blog post that I did. But what really intrigued me about John when I met him all those years ago was that he specializes in family businesses, families in business. I knew from my leadership and management training days that, yes, it's interesting, family businesses have different issues and dynamics to normal businesses. And then when I got into business broking and helping business owners get their businesses ready for sale, that a family business is not the same as any other business when you're trying to sell it. But anyway, more of that as we get into the conversation. It's my great pleasure now to welcome the family business guy, John Broons, to the podcast. Good day, John.
Good day, John. Thanks for the invitation to come along.
No, pleasure. We've had many good conversations over coffee, so it's time to record one and make it public. I think a lot of business owners will be interested in it. So, John, start by telling us a bit about your background and how you got into specializing in family businesses.
Well, I grew up in a family business, third generation. I was the next gen. My grandfather had started a business that had grown into be a public company that was listed on the stock exchange in the 1950s, 60s. And he passed away in mid-60s, and my father and uncle became the majority shareholders. They had an offer that was too good to refuse, so they sold out and went in different directions. So my dad kept some of the parts of the business that weren't transferred in the sale, and that's the business that I grew up in. So it was sawmilling and timber, merchandising and a bit of construction. It was one of those things that when you grow up as a kid, you feel like it's yours. So I left school and went to work at 17 in the family business. And it was just the natural thing to do. So I started on the shop floor, worked my way around the business to see what was done, how it was done, where it was done, and got to know the people and the systems and the processes. And then when my dad passed away, my oldest sister, who was his right-hand person, became managing director. My mum owned everything then, so ownership changed. My oldest sister was managing director. I was a director of logistics and manufacturing, had a brother-in-law in the business that looked after the sales side of things. And that worked quite well for a while. But then we had a recession in the late 80s. Times got tough. 5 families living off one business with cash flow issues isn't a good scenario for a happy family. There were a lot of struggles. I ended up, after that exercise, there were some real struggles and conversations, and I ended up buying the business off the family. That changed the family dynamic, and it was a restructuring. It was done in such a way that everybody was treated fairly, and I actually got my own life. It still was the family business as such, and I probably had every intention of having my kids join me in that business. A few years passed, and I started to grow and reinvest in the business, but I also realised it wasn't my life's passion. And I was also struggling with the fact that what I'd done, I did off the seat of my pants. Buying the business off your family is not something that many people do. That led me to find a lot of friends of mine who were in businesses with their families coming to me saying, how did you do it? And how come you're still friends with the rest of your family? Because most people see this kind of transaction as not positive outcomes and not being able to talk to family members anymore. So I started to look for how did I get through that stage so easily, in my terms, in my framework, so easily, because it took a good 6-12 months to work through a process through. and I found something called the Family Firm Institute that was based overseas. I found a few families in Melbourne that helped me understand the whole dynamic of family business. And I ended up the family business of the family, which led me to this whole process of learning about family business, studying about it while I was working in the family business. So it was one of those things where once I bought the family business from the family, I connected with some people that were starting up something that was to help families in business locally that became Family Business Australia. And I connected with people overseas at something called the Family Firm Institute. The Family Firm Institute educates advisors around the world how to deal with families in business. And that's a new organisation in itself. At the time, it was only going for about 15 or 20 years, if that. So I started to build my network of people who knew and understood families in business. The field started off discussing succession, when in fact now it's grown to be gender and culture and countries and a whole lot of other dynamics that play inside it. I stayed involved with Family Business Australia. I've been on the board of Family Business Australia. But with my business, I grew it, changed it, and sold out in 1997. Did a few other entrepreneurial things, sold olive trees to China, started a property maintenance business. In 2003, moved to Perth, where I now work from.
Okay, and there's a lot of things that you brought up in that story about your background. So what is it that makes family businesses so different to other businesses?
Principally, it's the people and the structure. The business can be the same. Every business, I could sit 5 shoe shops next to each other and they will all be different. And the reason they'll be different is either the people staffing the store, the way the windows are presented, the stock processes. So the business itself can be different alone. And when you're looking at a business to sell, you look at those things. You look at the human resources, you look at the processes and how different they are from each other, and people will put value on that. If it's a family business, the thing that creeps in early on in the piece, mum and dad actually own the shares. So when we look at a family business, question of process of how we run the business and what we do as a business and who is acting with the authority and the responsibility is very easy to know. If you work in a public company, you're given the responsibility to take on a position and you have the authority to work in that position. Ownership doesn't come into any conversation. That's the shareholders, that's the board that operates, that controls all of that. But a family business, the ownership is ever present. Mum or dad or auntie or uncle own the business. I might have 1 or 2 shares, or I might not have any shares, but I can be emotionally fixated and tied to the business. So if I'm a 17-year-old that leaves school to work in the business as I was, I felt I had a share in the business, but I had nothing other than this implied ownership. You have to work hard because this is how we make a living.
Yeah, and I guess over time, your expectancy of that ownership grows the more time you spend in the business.
There are lots of assumptions that we make on our journeys, especially in family business. Some parents can say to one child, one day this son or daughter, this will be yours, when the child is 5 or 10 years old. Now that can already build this idea of, oh, well, one day it will be mine. And then when the business is sold or the business fails or the business has grown to such an extent that it may have changed hands or there's partners involved, what does it mean if there are no more conversations to that 5 or 10-year-old? How do we communicate to that next generation that's coming through what's going to happen? And also, if you take the hit by a bus scenario, what happens if the owner of the business, the holder of the shares, or even just half the shares or some of the shares, what happens if that person is hit by a bus and they either can't come to work or they're because they're hospitalised or they're maimed in such a way they can't work, or if they're even worst case scenario, they pass. What happens to those shares? Who owns it? And if there's more than one child in the family, there might be interpretations and ideas on how that shareholding is split.
Do family businesses typically set themselves up with shares and allocate shares out? Because my experience has been that mum or dad own the business and there's no sort of distribution of shares, or it's never discussed.
Depends on the size of the family business, John, doesn't it? I mean, the more you've been in business, you can start off as a partnership, you can stay as a partnership, but then if it's run as a partnership, who are the partners and who are the decision makers? What's the structure inside it? There's an accountant inside that will have done the taxes for this business, possibly given some advice on structure. There might even be a lawyer who's been alongside that says you need to do something like put in place a shareholders agreement or a partnership arrangement. So somewhere in there, and that's a minefield in itself as to what are we going to do if? And a lot of people avoid going to this what are we going to do if place because it brings up hard questions. It brings up challenging questions. Well, if you aren't here, who do you want to go in and run the business? Who do you want to open the front door one day? And who will open up the front door? What happens if those two people are different people? What are you going to do about it? And some people just say, no, that's too hard. I'm going to let it go. And that's not fair to those next generation people. It's easy for you, sure, but a conversation should just be that. So we might even set some rules up about how we have a conversation about the family business.
Yeah, well, that's a great one. I know family businesses that they just never have those conversations. And I know that some of the siblings have got their ideas as to what's going to happen. Mum or dad pass and things like that. I mean, how do you get them to have the conversation, John? Because, there just seems to, in some families, a real reluctance to sit down and have that discussion.
So I use a few tools in what I do. There's something called a genogram that I will do when I sit down with a family for the first time. Sometimes I'm just sitting down with one person who's representing the family who's trying to learn about how the process works that I'll work with the family. So I use something called a genogram to build a picture of the family, to see who's who's connected. And in those in those early conversations, it's really important for me to get an understanding of the dynamics at play in the family. The first step is to understand the family stuff. And in some cases, it can go back before mum and dad. It can go back to the grandparents. It can go back to the great-grandparents. Things happen in families. We have lots of secrets in families, and that causes its own problem. To work through these things once I've got a bit of a feel for the family, and generally I even include the dynamic of who the husbands or wives are of those family members that work in the business, that are in the family dynamic, because they may not work in the business, but they have huge opportunity to influence the dynamic in the business. The old term pillow talk carries a fair bit of weight. So I need to understand and have conversations with those more outside the business as well, just to get a picture so I can work forward with that. And half the resolution, or more than half the resolution of issues that come up with families is if there's so much conflict that people won't come together, I need to find out what that conflict is, if I can, to find out or to see whether or not we can actually go through a process to remove that conflict or alleviate that conflict. And there's a process I use in that. And I suppose you would call it an education program.
That's interesting as well. I mean, quite often family businesses evolve and there's not a whole lot of training in terms of leadership and management and people skills. Like yourself, I think you suggested that was the case when you got into your family business, that there comes a point where you realize that you haven't had that external sort of training or skills. You've just evolved in the business. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Most people go into business and the first person they will talk to probably is an accountant How do we get or a bookkeeper? How do we make sure the books are right so that we can pay our taxes? And they're the influencing factors. They want to know how much profit they make and how to pay your tax to make sure that the government doesn't hassle you too much. So once you've gone past that accountant stage, how do we do business better is the big question. How do we make our business worth more? A lot of people might even believe that just knowing how much profit they make is how they read the business. Well, if you don't read the balance sheet with the profit and loss, you understand you don't really have a picture about the business. You can go broke by making so much profit. It's ridiculous because you're growing too quickly and there's no cash to go around. So that's just the business side of it. There has to be a family side of it. How do we have the conversations about who's involved in the business, what salary that person may or may not get, how we induct somebody into the business? Because if mum or dad says, son or daughter, come and work with me next week in the business, I want you to start full time, there may be no contract and everybody else might be on a contract, but there's no contract. There's no process in place to hire or take this individual on. And then because it's a casual conversation, there's no conversation about, well, what happens if you don't work out or you muck up or, you know, what's the plan in there? How do I fire you? How do you these are all challenging questions, but unless they're addressed before somebody comes into the business, it may be too late. And then when you want to sack them, in real simple terms, if you want to sack them, get out of here, you know, it's not working, you have a screaming argument in the middle of the office, it doesn't bode well, does it? You end up with real challenges.
Yeah, and I'm sure the dynamics between the non-family members in the business and the family members in the business can be pretty difficult at times in terms of the non-family members maybe see or feel that the family members are getting favours that they're not getting or getting privileges that they're not getting. You know, they're not on an equal footing, as it were.
That comes up a lot of the time. In a lot of cases where I've had involvement with families in business, sometimes the family member is actually made to struggle and not paid as much as others that would be had they had somebody external in the position to make them feel that, you know, they deserve it more. There's no offer of shares because you're not earning as much, but it's just an encouragement. It's emotional blackmail to some degree, and that's not fair, you know. So what are the rules that the family lives by and what are their values? I mean, if they talk about integrity as a family in business, how would that show true integrity to the next generation when you're not paying me enough? Or if you pay me way too much, how is that fair to those other employees? And, you know, people in businesses, if they don't know what's actually going on, they'll make it up a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So, you know, we do have to do a bit of work in understanding what's going on in the dynamic of each individual family.
Yeah, and who reports to who and who's the leader? This is a classic, not just in family business, but in any business. Quite often I'll talk to staff members, team members, and say, so who's the leader? Who do you see as the leader? And I'll get different answers from different people because there's no clear leadership set up. And I know we've had some good conversations about different cultural backgrounds in businesses. Like I had an Italian family business as a client where the son had been put in charge of running the business. But the dad, his dad, who was supposedly retired, was still coming in every day and poking his finger in and telling the son what to do. You know, and the staff still saw the dad as being the boss, not the son.
Well, and that's the biggest issue of all. That's this ownership question that gets in the way. Dad is seen as the owner, and yet dad has, for all intents and purposes, he's given the son the authority and the responsibility, but he comes in and he trumps it, he overplays it, he goes over the top. So in truth, he's never really given that individual, the son, the opportunity to be his own boss. That's just one little issue that comes up. And I say little issue. If mum or dad want to separate from the family business and they give the son or daughter or the family the reins, that next generation, and they want to go off and retire or travel, if they could right now, or do other things, how do they extricate themselves from the business financially? There might be home loans that are tied as guarantees to the business. There could be business loans that are put together by the parents that are structured in a way that should they take those guarantees away, it puts different pressures onto the business, so the next generation don't have the capital sufficient to operate the business successfully anymore.
It gets pretty complicated, doesn't it?
It does get complicated.
And you mentioned culture before, and we're talking about Italian family business, but any, I guess, different culture, they have their different value sets. And then you can get businesses where you've got a mixture of cultures because different members of the family marry into different cultures.
100%. The Italian son could marry a lovely Thai girl, and their cultures, although the children absolutely love each other dearly, the cultures will be very different. The backgrounds will be very different. So the culture that the new bonding of that new family of the son and daughter-in-law, the Italian with the Thai, can challenge the rest of the Italian culture. They do it differently to us. So how do we work through those differences to make sure it doesn't get inside the business and contaminate stuff?
Yes, I can imagine some interesting conversations. And as you and I have discussed over coffee, that's not an area that I like to delve into too much. No. I'm happy, having had an engineering background, I'm happy dealing with the facts and figures and the data. Most
people have assumptions. And where do they get these assumptions from? Who said the influencing factor in the first place? And how did you come to that idea that you hold so strongly to? And then what is actually the truth? And the truth can be held in 3 or 4 or 5 different places or more. So we have to really find a level that we need to work within as a group. If we're a family who are in business together, we need to have a set of rules, a rule book, a way of understanding each other. And this rule book, in Australia, we call it probably a family charter. Overseas, they call it a constitution. It's not actually a legal document, but it's just rules for how this family works. So I've put together these family constitutions for a number of families over the years. And it's how we will deal with issues, such as how do we employ the kids? How do we sack the kids? That may not be the case, but how do we share our profits if we want to give something to the community as charity? That's a family thing. In a lot of families that are in business, they want to give money to charity. How do they do it? Because once the kids come along, your idea of giving to the Cancer Council might be different because somebody wants to give to the party that's promoting wind turbines or ocean power that'll make it a better country and a better place for everyone to live. So we need to have conversations on philanthropy. They're just 2 little areas. There's lots of places that we can have conversations, and we just set some rules up for how we treat each other as family.
All those sort of issues, and topic that I raise carefully with business owners as well is the topic of wills and having a will. You know,
that's a big issue, John.
I know. I keep well away from that. I just ask the question, you know, of course you do have wills in place, don't you? And if the answer is anything other than yes, it's, well, I can recommend a good lawyer, because it's just so critical that the wills are set up in place and up to date.
It's not just having a will that's set up, John. In my experience, having a will is the first step. If you don't have a will, then the state or government trustee takes control and you don't have access to anything anymore. Well, for a period of 3-6 months, depending on how long it takes to resolve the passing of that individual. However, once you have a will, once you've made a decision on how you're going to transfer the ownership of the business, don't keep it a secret. If in your will you're going to say to your kids, okay, there's 3 kids, there's 4 kids, I'm going to give you each an equal share, That's one way of looking at it, because that's being fair in your mind. But if two of the kids are in the business and two aren't, what are those kids thinking? How is that fair in their mind if two are working every day to make a success and generate the funds that the family wealth is growing by, and the other two are not? There's a whole conversation about what's fair and who believes what's right and what's wrong in this. So if mum or dad in their will says it all goes to even Stevens across the board, and then they don't find out till the reading of the will, then we have arguments.
It's interesting because a lot of people don't like to make their wills sort of open, I guess.
Yeah, but who are they keeping it secret from?
Yeah, I know. It's and I guess where maybe you've got a husband and wife who are owners of the business, and they may have come from previous marriages, and there may be other children, outside of the current family as well,
yes,
who may think they've got some sort of ownership or rights. I admire you for taking these things on and working through them, because it's just a minefield.
Well, it is a bit of a minefield, but if you come at it from the point of view that this is going to have a better outcome, if you're involved, then if you're not involved, it's going to just explode and be a mess anyhow. I know that through my experience and my studies that there's every opportunity for a family who wants to learn a little bit, that they can overcome lots of different issues that potentially will come up in the future if they talk about them.
Tell us a little bit about how you work or how you start working with a family business. And I know you've got some online courses as well where people can get some education. So just tell us how you start with them and what people can do to get some help.
In most cases, people are referred to me. So it's word of mouth. I have got a website, johnbroons.com, www.johnbroons.com. But the way people will work to me is we make an approach. I'll have a coffee. I'll scope out what it is that we need to talk about, and we'll put together a project. And it could be 6 months, it could be 12 months. In some cases, it's an evolution. There's nothing really that can be done in a week or two unless somebody's along the path. Generally, if you've got to have conversations with the next generation, it's how well you're communicating with either the parents, if you're a younger person. How do I get mum and dad involved and get them to understand that they need to talk to you? And sometimes the parents are saying, well, how do I need to structure this so that it doesn't blow up after we're gone? The conversation, if they want to start with me, they can find me on the internet. My mobile number's there and my email's there. And I can meet on Zoom or face-to-face. Personally, I know it's better to meet face-to-face. I've worked with families where I've had to travel interstate to see the children of the family owners, the family business owners. So face-to-face is always much better than remote Zooming, unless I'm working one-on-one with an individual as a coach.
Okay, and you've got a couple of online courses, haven't you, that people can access? Yes,
I've got familiesinbusiness.teachable.com. So these two courses are up on a United States education platform. So it's www.familiesinbusiness.teachable.com. Yep, and they'll find a couple of courses there.
Because, and I think once they get started with something like that, they'd probably want to contact you as well and just get you involved. Anything else you would like to say about family businesses, particularly when it comes to selling, a family business? Because that's the area that I work in.
In selling a family business, a lot of people where parents are selling the business and they have kids that aren't in the business, have some discussions about what they intend to do with the funds, make sure their wills are in good order, that the children aren't going to have arguments afterwards, if they choose to. I mean, they don't have to divulge that, but it's always going to have a better outcome if the next generation know what's coming in the will. Other than talking about wills, when you look at how do we make sure that people can get good outcomes when they're selling their business? Family businesses, what's in it for me is a big question. How much is enough is another big question. What do you want to get from this? And we all will have different ideas and different views on that. Brothers and sisters, cousins, aunts and uncles, depending on where they sit in the whole family business structure, will have ideas. Some might just be employees waiting for their salary to come every week, and that will be happy that, that they get continued employment in the new structure. Some might want a piece of the action and say, I want to retire and be paid out. It depends on the individual there.
Yeah, that's what I found with looking at family businesses when they were wanting to sell. It was, well, how many of the family are going to stay in the business after the sale? Yeah, and is it a family member that's going to buy the business, or is it an external person? If it's an external person, then their biggest concern, of course, is, well, if key people in the business are family members, then they may say now that they're going to stay in the business, but then under the new owner, they may not get on with the new owner.
Yeah, that's true.
So it becomes quite a difficult sale in that situation.
One thing that through my experience is if you're the owner of the business and you can structure a business to work without you and be profitable without you, then you're in a much better position to be able to sell your business. So if you can be working on your business rather than in your business most of the time, you're in a better position to sell, because although you might be held on to for 12 months in a contract or whatever, the business actually proves itself much easier to transition.
Yes, thank you for that. That's exactly why I train business owners on how to get their business ready for sale. And a business that's ready for sale is a business that will run profitably without the business owner having to be there. So it's a profitable commercial enterprise that runs without the business owner. I was approached by somebody recently who has an accounting practice and said, look, I'm thinking about selling my business. And I had to point out to him, he doesn't actually have a business. He's got a practice, because you take him out, what's left? It's a practice. So you're right. And whether it's a family business or any other business, it needs to be able to run without the owner being there. So even if you're not wanting to sell your business, just getting it into that state is a very valuable thing to do.
Yeah, most people that are trying to get out of a business are finding that they're exhausted and they're stressed out and they can't extricate themselves in a way. So they think, okay, well, the best thing is to sell the business. With a little bit of help and support from you, they might get it into a position where it's actually quite profitable and working very well in a short space of time, in which case they decide not to sell it because it's working and they've actually got themselves a better life.
Which is why I stopped business broking. Well, there are other issues as well around people getting finance and stuff, but yes, I did have that a few times where, having given the business owner some advice, they then ended up not wanting to sell it, so I didn't get paid.
Well, I think to some degree your passion for helping people comes across, and I think overall that's why I do what I do. Families break up because of bad business decisions or lack of conversation. And my driving force is trying to keep the family unit together, make sure families stay together because they want to, not because they've had an argument about somebody that made a silly decision one day.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yes, I'll say I admire your enthusiasm and your passion for dealing with these things. So we'll wrap up now. John, I really have enjoyed the chat as always. And if people want to get in touch with you, they can get you through www.johnbroons, that's BROONS, johnbroons.com. Hopefully get you in the early days before it becomes
a bit challenging for the family.
Challenging or emotional and all those things, yeah. So, all right, lovely talking to you again, John. And look forward to our next catch up over a coffee.
Thanks very much, John.
Thanks again. Bye for now. What an excellent session that was with the family business guy, John Broons. So much in that, so much information, so many topics we covered. I strongly recommend you go to John's website, johnbroons.com, and check out John's courses and services there, because family businesses can be pretty complicated. They can certainly be very challenging if the family decide to sell, or one member of the family decides to sell. But there are just so many things that need to be thought of and worked on. Go to johnbroons.com. And if you want any more help from me with respect to selling your business or getting your business ready for sale, then check things out at johndenton.com.au, or you can go to businessreadyforsale.com. I've got more great podcast interviews lined up for you around getting businesses ready for sale. So make sure you don't miss out by subscribing for these podcasts at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. So from me, John Denton, it's bye for now.